Sometimes, when the diner was quiet, she'd catch herself humming the same jazz tune Mr. Henry used to hum. She never realized how much space one person could take up, even when they weren't there anymore. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when everything changed again. The diner was half empty, filled only with a few regulars sipping coffee and a young couple eating in silence. Outside, the street was wet and gray, puddles reflecting the flickering lights of passing cars. Tanya was refilling salt shakers when she noticed a sleek black car pull up outside. It wasn't the kind of car that ever stopped in front of Maple Diner. It was long, shiny, and expensive, completely out of place among the old pickup trucks and city buses. The door opened, and 4 men stepped out. They were dressed in dark suits and carried an air of quiet authority. When they entered the diner, the bell above the door jingled softly, but the sound was swallowed by the sudden silence that fell over the room. Every head turned. Even the manager, who had been counting receipts at the counter, straightened immediately, his face turning pale. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked, trying to sound professional. The tallest man stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "We're looking for a waitress named Tanya Williams." Tanya froze mid-step, the salt shaker still in her hand. The sound of her own heartbeat filled her ears. "That's me," she said after a moment, setting the shaker down and wiping her palms nervously on her apron. The man nodded and reached into the briefcase he was carrying. The other 3 men stood behind him, serious and silent, like bodyguards. "Miss Williams," he said respectfully, "Mr. Henry asked us to deliver this personally." At the mention of that name, Tanya felt the world tilt slightly beneath her feet. "Mr. Henry," she whispered, her throat tight. The man handed her a sealed envelope, thick and cream-colored, with her name written in elegant cursive on the front, to Miss Tanya Williams. She stared at it, her hands trembling. Is he okay?" she asked quietly. The man's eyes softened. "I'm afraid Mr. Henry passed away several weeks ago." A hush fell over the diner. Even the clinking of cups stopped. Tanya's lips parted, but no words came out. She could only nod slowly, her eyes fixed on the envelope. With shaky fingers, she tore it open. Inside was a folded letter and a stack of documents, neatly clipped together. The first thing she saw was his handwriting, careful, old-fashioned, and unmistakably his. She began to read, her eyes moving slowly across each line. "Dear Tanya. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. I wasn't the man you thought I was. I wasn't homeless, I was testing kindness. I wanted to see if true compassion still existed in this world, if anyone would look at me and see a human being instead of a burden. You did. You saw me when no one else did. You treated me with dignity when everyone else turned away. Everyone deserves a second chance," she would tell them, echoing the same compassion that had once guided her toward Mr. Henry. Every morning, before opening the doors, she placed a plate of pancakes and a cup of hot coffee by the window booth, just like before. Some of her staff thought it was just a ritual, but Tanya knew better. It was her way of keeping Mr. Henry's spirit alive. Sometimes, when the light hit the glass just right, she swore she could almost see his reflection smiling back at her, that familiar gentle grin and the kind eyes that once told her, "You've given me hope again." The laughter that used to mock her now filled the diner with joy and love. Families came not just to eat but to feel something special, a warmth that money couldn't buy. People would share stories, hug strangers, and sometimes even pay for others' meals despite the "free for those in need" sign. Henry's table had become more than a restaurant, it had become a movement, a place where hearts healed over cups of coffee and plates of pancakes. One evening, as the sun set in hues of orange and gold, Tanya stood at the doorway, watching the crowd inside. A mother and her 2 kids were laughing over a shared sundae, an elderly man was playing a tune on an old harmonica, and the staff moved with smiles that glowed brighter than the lights above. Tanya's eyes shimmered as she whispered softly, "You did this, Mr. Henry. You're still here." Later that night, she sat in her favorite booth again, the one by the window. The rain had stopped, and the city lights shimmered in the puddles outside. She took a sip of coffee, then looked across at the empty seat with a small, grateful smile. "I thought I was helping you," she murmured, "but you were really helping me find my purpose." The diner clock ticked softly in the background as the world outside went quiet. Tanya closed her eyes, feeling peace wash over her heart. In that moment, she knew, kindness doesn't vanish when a person is gone. It lives on, multiplying through every person it touches. Every meal served, every hand extended, every heart lifted, they were all pieces of Mr. Henry's legacy, and of her own. And so, under the soft glow of Henry's table, Tanya Williams kept his promise alive, proving to the world that one act of kindness can ripple far beyond what anyone could ever imagine. Because in a world where people often look away, one woman proved that love and compassion could still change lives. Tanya Williams didn't have much, just a tired smile, a warm heart, and the belief that kindness still mattered. While others hurried through their lives, judging by appearances and ignoring pain that wasn't their own, Tanya stopped to see people for who they were inside. She didn't see a homeless man when Mr. Henry walked in, she saw a soul who needed warmth, respect, and dignity. Tanya was wiping down tables near the window when she noticed a familiar shape through the glass, a frail old man, moving slowly against the wind, his tattered coat soaked through, his shoulders hunched beneath the weight of the weather. It was Mr. Henry. He was clutching his cap tightly, trying to shield his head from the rain, but his hands were shaking too much to hold it steady. The sight made Tanya's heart twist. Without a second thought, she grabbed her umbrella from behind the counter and rushed outside, ignoring her manager's shout of, "Tanya! Where are you going?" The wind whipped against her face as she ran into the drizzle. "Mr. Henry," she called out. The old man turned, his expression a mix of surprise and exhaustion. When she reached him, she tilted the umbrella to cover them both. "You shouldn't be out here like this," she scolded softly, her voice trembling with concern. "Come inside before you get sick." He smiled faintly, the rain running down his weathered face like tears. "You're always worrying about me," he said, his voice rough but gentle. "Of course I am," Tanya replied, looping her arm through his to steady him. "You're my favorite customer." They walked slowly back toward the diner door, her shoes splashing through shallow puddles. Inside, a few customers glanced their way, whispering as Tanya guided the old man to his usual booth by the window. She fetched him a towel and a cup of hot tea, the steam rising between them like a quiet comfort. As she set the cup down, she noticed his hands trembling worse than usual. "Mr. Henry, are you okay?" she asked softly. He nodded but didn't answer right away. He looked out the window for a long moment, watching the rain trace lines down the glass. Then, with a sigh, he reached into the inside pocket of his worn coat and pulled out a small, crumpled envelope. His fingers lingered on it before he extended it toward her. "Mr. Henry, what's this?" Tanya asked, confused. He looked at her with those same kind, tired eyes she had come to know so well. "You've done enough for me, child," he said quietly. "More than you'll ever know." She frowned, shaking her head. "I don't understand." He smiled faintly. "You will. Soon." Before Tanya could say another word, he stood up, slow and shaky, but with a strange strength in his movements, as if he'd made peace with something deep inside. "Take care of yourself, Tanya," he said. "You've got a light that this world needs." "Wait, where are you going?" "You can't go out in that weather," she called after him, but he just gave a little wave, pushing open the diner door. The bell above it jingled softly, and then he was gone, disappearing into the gray mist and falling rain. Tanya stood frozen for a moment, the envelope still in her hand. She thought about opening it right then, but something stopped her. Maybe she wanted to wait until she saw him again. Maybe she was afraid of what it meant. "You gave me warmth, hope, and friendship with no promise of reward. You passed the test, my dear. Everything I owned, my company, my home, and my savings, now belongs to you. You've earned it not with work or wealth, but with heart. Tanya's hands began to shake so badly she nearly dropped the papers. She blinked, trying to process what she was reading. His company, she whispered. The man nodded. Mr. Henry Cole, founder and CEO of Cole Enterprises. He had no living family. He left everything to you, Miss Williams, as stated in his will. Her co-workers stood frozen, eyes wide. The manager's jaw hung open. One of the cooks whispered, "You mean that old man was rich?" The lawyer continued gently, "He instructed us to find you exactly 60 days after his passing. He wanted to make sure you never helped him for what he had, only for who he was." Tanya's eyes filled with tears. She pressed the letter to her chest, whispering through sobs, "I didn't do it for anything. I just wanted him to know someone cared." The man gave a small smile. "And that's why he chose you." At that moment, the entire diner was silent except for Tanya's quiet crying. The people who had once mocked her now stared in awe. The manager, speechless, muttered, "I guess we were wrong about him, and about you." Tanya looked down at the papers, her name printed neatly across legal documents that listed assets, properties, and accounts worth more than she could ever imagine. But to her, none of it mattered as much as the letter in her hand, the proof that her kindness had meant something to someone who needed it most. Outside, the rain had stopped. A faint beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling across the diner floor and lighting up the booth by the window, Mr. Henry's booth. Tanya turned toward it, her heart heavy but full. "You kept your promise, Mr. Henry," she whispered. "You said I'd understand soon, and now I do." And for the first time in months, Tanya smiled, not because she had inherited a fortune, but because she knew that in a world so quick to judge, one act of kindness had truly changed everything. Tanya gasped, her breath catching in her throat as the weight of the letter sank in. For a long moment, the diner stood still, not a spoon clinked, not a whisper moved through the air. Then the room erupted in murmurs and gasps, the sound rising like a wave of disbelief. "Is this a joke?" the manager blurted out, his face pale, eyes darting between the letter and the men in suits. But the lawyers didn't flinch. One of them, the same tall man who had handed her the envelope, stepped forward and spoke with calm authority. "This is no joke, sir. Mr. Henry Cole, founder of Cole Enterprises, left his entire estate to Miss Tanya Williams. His final wish was clear, to give everything he owned to the one person who showed him love without expecting anything in return." That night, long after the cameras had left and the last of the curious customers had drifted away, Tanya sat alone in the booth where Mr. Henry used to sit. The diner lights glowed softly, casting golden reflections on the windowpane streaked with rain. She placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of the empty seat across from her, just the way he used to like it, black with a little sugar, and smiled sadly. "You were right," she whispered into the quiet. "Kindness never goes unnoticed." Outside, the rain drizzled against the glass, a gentle rhythm that seemed to echo his old humming, those soft jazz tunes he used to sing under his breath while watching the world go by. Tanya wrapped her arms around herself, feeling both the ache of loss and the warmth of peace. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. But more than the money or the fame, what filled her heart was something far greater, the knowledge that what she had done out of love had truly mattered to someone. The next morning, the diner was unrecognizable. Reporters crowded the sidewalks, flashing cameras through the window as the morning news vans lined up along Maple Street. Headlines across town had already begun to spread, "Waitress inherits millions from homeless man," and "The kindness that changed a life." Tanya tried to hide from the attention, ducking behind the counter as microphones were pushed toward her. "Miss Williams. How does it feel to be a millionaire? Is it true you gave free meals to the man for weeks? What will you do with all that money?" She didn't have answers, not the kind they wanted, anyway. All she could say, through a soft, tearful smile, was, "He was my friend. I just did what anyone should do." That humility, that quiet grace, only made people love her more. Customers who once mocked her began to leave notes of apology and small flowers on the counter. Strangers mailed letters from all over the country, thanking her for reminding them that kindness still existed. And as the days turned to weeks, Tanya knew she had to do something meaningful with what Mr. Henry had given her. She used part of her inheritance to buy the diner from the old manager, the same one who had once scolded her for giving away free food. She renamed it Henry's Table, in honor of the man who changed her life. The new sign gleamed above the door, written in golden letters that caught the morning light. Beneath it, she added a small phrase that said, "Where kindness is always served." From the day Henry's Table reopened, it wasn't just a diner anymore, it was a haven. Meals were free for the homeless, for single mothers struggling to get by, for veterans who had nowhere else to go. Tanya hired people who others had given up on, ex-convicts, recovering addicts, single parents, and even a few of her old co-workers who came to her with tearful apologies. "Never turn away someone who's hungry," her mother used to say. "You might be entertaining angels without knowing it." Tanya carried that lesson in her bones. That evening, when Mr. Henry got up to leave, Tanya quietly packed a small paper bag with leftover biscuits, a sandwich, and a slice of pie. "Here," she said, handing it to him at the door. "Something for later." He blinked, his eyes glassy with tears. "You keep feeding me like this, I'll start thinking I'm somebody special." "You are," she said simply. "Everybody is." Mr. Henry chuckled softly, his voice cracking. "You sound like my daughter," he murmured. "She used to say things like that before she passed." Tanya's smile faded. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know." He nodded, his eyes distant. "You couldn't have. But when you talk, I can almost hear her again." He placed a shaky hand over hers. "God bless you, child. You've given me hope again." Those words stuck with Tanya long after he left. She didn't know what he meant by them exactly, but they made her chest ache in a way she couldn't explain. The more time she spent with him, the more she realized how little she knew about his past. He never talked about where he lived or what he'd done before coming to Maple Street. He just appeared every morning like clockwork, polite, quiet, and full of stories about music, people, and life lessons that sounded too wise to come from a drifter. Sometimes she wondered, what had brought him here? What had he lost? One afternoon, while refilling his cup, she noticed something unusual. When he reached into his pocket for change, a flash of something gold caught her eye, a fine-looking pocket watch, old but still shining. It was engraved with the initials HC. "That's a nice watch," she said casually. He looked startled for a second, then smiled faintly. "Old thing," he said, tucking it away. "Just a memory I keep close." Something about the way he said it made her pause. There was a sadness in his voice, like the kind that comes from carrying secrets too heavy to share. As the days passed, Tanya's care for Mr. Henry became more than habit, it became a quiet friendship. The others still laughed, whispering when she wasn't looking. But Tanya didn't care. She'd learned long ago that doing good wasn't always popular. What she didn't know, what no one in that diner knew, was that the frail old man she was feeding every morning wasn't just a poor stranger. He was testing something far greater than anyone realized. And soon, the truth about who he really was would turn Tanya's entire world upside down. One cold afternoon, the sky over Maple Street turned a dull, heavy gray, and the first drops of rain began to splatter against the diner windows. The usual warmth of the place felt dimmer that day, the chatter quieter, the smell of coffee and pancakes somehow not as comforting. Tanya looked down at the papers again, legal contracts, estate ownership, even business shares worth millions. The numbers didn't matter to her. What mattered was that a lonely man she had once shared coffee with had seen her heart for what it was. As she stood there, she remembered that first day, how Mr. Henry had stumbled in, cold and hungry, ignored by everyone. How she had smiled at him, offered him a hot meal, and treated him like any other customer. She remembered how he had looked up at her with tired eyes and whispered, "You're the first person who's been kind to me in a long time." Now, she realized what those words truly meant. The lawyer gently closed the briefcase and handed her a smaller envelope. "Inside are the keys to his home and a personal note he wanted you to keep. He said you'd know what to do with it." Tanya took it with trembling hands. The entire diner was silent, watching as she wiped away her tears. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. I just wanted to help him. I didn't care who he was." The lawyer smiled kindly. "And that's exactly why he chose you." At that moment, something inside Tanya broke, not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude. She covered her mouth with her hand, trying not to sob, but the tears came anyway. Every emotion she had held back for weeks, the worry, the doubt, the grief, poured out at once. The people around her didn't dare interrupt. Some lowered their heads, some wiped their own eyes, and others simply stared, humbled by what they had just witnessed. The diner, once filled with judgment and laughter, now carried a quiet reverence. When Tanya finally found her voice again, she whispered softly to no one in particular, "He gave me more than money, he gave me meaning." Outside, the black car waited, glistening in the soft drizzle. The lawyers gathered the documents and respectfully nodded before leaving. As they stepped out, a ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling across the window booth where Mr. Henry once sat. Tanya turned to it, her heart full, her tears still glistening. "Thank you, Mr. Henry," she whispered. "You saw me when no one else did." And in that quiet diner, with the whole world watching in stunned silence, Tanya Williams finally realized that true kindness doesn't just change others, sometimes, it changes the course of your own life forever. The room fell silent again. All eyes turned to Tanya. The waitress who had once been overlooked, mocked, and judged now stood trembling in the middle of the diner, clutching a letter that had just changed her life forever. Her lips parted, but words refused to come. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the elegant handwriting she had just read. The regular customers, the same people who had once whispered behind her back when she helped Mr. Henry, now sat frozen, their expressions shifting from shock to shame. The manager, red-faced, took a step back, rubbing the back of his neck. "Henry Cole," he repeated, his voice cracking slightly. "The billionaire? The one with the downtown offices?" And he stopped, realizing how absurd it sounded now. The lawyers exchanged a knowing glance. One nodded to the doorway, and moments later, 2 bodyguards entered carrying a sleek black briefcase. The sound of their footsteps echoed across the tile floor as everyone watched in stunned silence. They placed the briefcase on a nearby table and opened it carefully. Inside was a stack of neatly organized documents, thick folders with legal seals, estate deeds, and account papers that shimmered faintly under the diner's yellow lights. "This," said the lawyer, gesturing to the open case, "is the formal documentation of Mr. Cole's last will and testament. It includes proof of ownership, business shares, and title deeds to his main estate on Westfield Avenue. Everything you see here now belongs to you, Miss Williams." Tanya stared, unable to process what she was hearing. The words sounded like they belonged to someone else's life, not hers. I don't deserve this," she whispered shakily, her voice breaking. The lawyer looked at her with gentle understanding. "He thought differently," he said softly. "In fact, he said you reminded him of his late daughter, her kindness, her warmth, the way she treated everyone equally. He told us that meeting you gave him something money couldn't buy, hope." Tanya's knees almost gave way. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself, her heart pounding in her chest. Tears streamed freely down her cheeks now, falling onto the letter she clutched to her chest. "He said I reminded him of his daughter," she murmured, barely able to speak the words. Around her, the diner's atmosphere shifted. The same people who had once laughed when she offered a seat to a ragged old man now stood silent, guilt heavy in their eyes. The cook, who used to joke that she was wasting her time being too kind, lowered his head. Even the manager, who once scolded her for giving free meals, couldn't bring himself to meet her gaze. The lawyer continued, his tone respectful. Mr. Cole didn't want to be remembered for his wealth. He wanted to be remembered for finding one genuine heart in a world full of judgment. You gave him that, Miss Williams. Her small acts, a plate of pancakes, a kind word, a seat by the window, were never meant to be grand gestures. But in a world starving for empathy, they became miracles. Tanya's story reminded everyone that sometimes, it's the people society overlooks who carry the greatest lessons. She didn't do it for attention, money, or praise. She did it because, deep down, she knew that kindness is never wasted, that it plants seeds in hearts, even if they take years to bloom. When the truth about Mr. Henry came out, the world saw what Tanya had always believed, that compassion has the power to break barriers and rewrite destinies. She didn't just serve food at Henry's table, she served hope. Her diner became a place where broken people found belonging, and where judgment turned into understanding. And somewhere, beyond this world, Mr. Henry was smiling, proud of the waitress who saw beyond his worn clothes, proud of the woman who gave without asking for anything in return. Because in Tanya's simple acts of love, he found proof that goodness still existed. And through her, the world learned that kindness isn't weakness, it's the greatest strength of all. Every day, Tanya found herself drawn a little closer to the quiet dignity of the old man everyone called Mr. Henry. There was something about him, something that didn't fit the picture of a man who'd lost everything. Despite his ragged clothes and worn-out shoes, he carried himself with a calm pride, the kind that came from a life once filled with purpose. When he spoke, his voice was soft but steady, each word chosen carefully, like a man who had once been listened to. Most mornings, he'd sit by the window, his hands cupped around a steaming mug of coffee that Tanya had paid for herself. She noticed how he always looked outside, as if the world beyond the glass held memories he couldn't quite let go of. Sometimes, he'd hum a few bars of an old jazz tune, slow, soulful, and full of longing. The melody would drift through the diner, blending with the clatter of dishes and low chatter of customers. A few people rolled their eyes, but Tanya always smiled. "That's beautiful," she told him once. He smiled back, his teeth yellowed but his eyes alive. "Used to play piano in a band," he said. "Long time ago. Before life got complicated." The other waitresses didn't understand why Tanya bothered with him. They were young, loud, and more interested in tips than kindness. "Girl," one of them teased, "you spending all your time talking to that old man like he's your granddaddy. He probably don't even remember your name." Tanya just laughed. "Maybe not," she said. "But I remember his." They didn't see what she saw. Mr. Henry wasn't just some homeless old man. There was gentleness in his manner, and a certain weight in his words. When Tanya had a bad day, he always noticed. "Don't let the world turn you cold, child," he'd say. "People may not see your kindness now, but kindness has a way of coming back around." Still, not everyone shared her compassion. The diner's manager, Mr. Clayton, had started keeping an eye on her. One afternoon, when the lunch rush died down, he called her into the back office. "Tanya," he said sternly, "we've got to talk about you giving away free meals again." She stood by the counter, wiping her apron nervously. "Sir, it's just one plate here and there." He cut her off. "He's not your responsibility. This is a business, not a soup kitchen." She lowered her voice but didn't back down. "With respect, sir, that man's somebody's father, somebody's son. He deserves to eat just like anybody else." Mr. Clayton sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You've got a big heart, Tanya, but hearts don't pay bills. If the owner finds out, it's your job on the line, not mine. For a moment, she hesitated. But then she lifted her chin. If being kind is a crime, then I'm guilty. She walked out before he could respond. Her hands trembled a little, but she didn't regret it. She'd grown up watching her mother feed neighbors when they had nothing to spare. That night, on the bus ride home, she stared out at the wet city streets flashing under streetlights, the reflection of raindrops like tiny stars against the window. She kept replaying his words in her head. You'll understand soon. He had sounded almost like he was saying goodbye. She turned the envelope over in her hands, feeling the rough paper between her fingers. Her name was written on it in shaky cursive, to Tanya. The ink had bled slightly from the rain. She smiled sadly and tucked it into her bag. I'll ask him about it tomorrow, she whispered to herself, even though something deep down told her she wouldn't get the chance. The next morning, the diner felt colder than usual. The booth by the window was empty. Tanya poured an extra cup of coffee anyway, placing it in front of his usual seat, just in case. But hours passed, and he didn't come. Your old friend finally moved on, huh? One of the cooks joked, wiping his hands on his apron. Tanya tried to smile. Maybe, she said quietly. Maybe he did. But her voice cracked slightly at the end. The days turned into weeks. Each morning, Tanya looked toward the door, hoping to see him shuffle in like always, clutching his old cap and giving that tired little smile. But the bell above the door never rang for him again. Customers noticed. The regulars started asking questions. Where's that old man who used to sit by the window? Haven't seen him around lately. Tanya would just shrug, trying not to let her worry show. But every night when she walked home, she felt the ache of not knowing. Sometimes she'd dream of him, sitting in his booth, humming that same jazz tune, smiling at her like nothing had changed. And every morning she woke up hoping it was real. But the booth stayed empty. The pancakes went uneaten. And though she didn't yet know it, that small crumpled envelope sitting at the bottom of her bag would soon reveal the truth, a truth that would change everything she thought she knew about the old man named Henry, and about her own life forever. 2 months passed, and life at Maple Diner slowly returned to its routine rhythm, at least on the surface. The coffee still brewed every morning, the bell above the door still chimed as customers came and went, and Tanya still worked her usual shift with her warm smile. But inside, she wasn't the same. Every day, she glanced toward the booth by the window, the one where Mr. Henry used to sit, waiting for him to walk in just one more time. The chair stayed empty, collecting dust and memories. She'd even stopped removing the extra cup of coffee she poured for him each morning. It was her quiet way of keeping hope alive. Her coworkers stopped teasing her after a while. Even the manager, Mr. Clayton, had gone soft on her. There was something about the way she moved now, gentler, sadder, but stronger too. The smell of fresh coffee filled the small diner on the corner of Maple Street, mingling with the buttery scent of pancakes sizzling on the griddle. The morning rush had just begun, and the low hum of chatter mixed with the sound of clinking cups and scraping chairs. Outside, the air was cold, and a light drizzle streaked the window glass, blurring the neon sign that read Maple Diner, home of the best breakfast in town. As the door creaked open, a frail old man shuffled in. His coat was worn and torn at the sleeves, his shoes barely holding together with tape. His gray beard was unkempt, and his hands trembled slightly as he clutched a faded cap against his chest. The warmth of the diner hit his face, and for a moment, his cloudy blue eyes softened. But as he looked around, he could feel the stares. The laughter at one of the back booths quieted, then started again, softer this time, but he knew what it meant. People turned their heads away, pretending to be busy with their menus or phones, avoiding his gaze as if poverty were contagious. But one person didn't look away. A young black waitress named Tanya Williams noticed him immediately. She had seen him before, same time, same booth by the window, every morning for the past week. He always sat quietly, never caused trouble, and never ordered more than a cup of hot water. She had asked him once if he wanted something to eat, and he had smiled sadly and said, "Maybe next time, dear." That morning, Tanya made up her mind. She couldn't stand to see him sitting there, empty-handed, while others laughed and filled their plates. She grabbed a plate of warm pancakes, drizzled some syrup over them, and added a side of scrambled eggs. As she carried it to his table, her coworkers whispered. "Girl, what are you doing?" one of them said under her breath. "You know he can't pay for that." "I don't care," Tanya replied quietly, balancing the plate carefully. "Everybody deserves a good breakfast." She walked over to his booth, her sneakers squeaking softly against the tiled floor. "Morning, Mr. Henry," she said warmly, as if greeting an old friend. The old man looked up in surprise. You remembered my name?" he asked, his voice weak but filled with wonder. "Of course," she smiled. "Can't let you sit here hungry another day. Eat up. It's on me." For a long second, the man just stared at her, as though trying to see if she was serious. Then, slowly, his lips trembled into a smile, small, shaky, but genuine. "You're too kind, dear," he whispered. "No one's spoken to me like that in years." Tanya just shrugged. "Well, then it's about time someone did." As she turned to walk away, she could feel the judgmental eyes of her coworkers on her back. She heard one of them chuckle, "She's feeding strays now." But she didn't care. She'd grown up poor herself, she knew what it felt like to be invisible. Her mother had always told her, "Kindness don't cost you nothing, baby, but it can buy someone a reason to keep going." She glanced back at Mr. Henry. He was eating slowly, carefully, as if each bite mattered. The way he held the fork with both hands showed how frail he really was. Tanya noticed that his nails were cracked, his skin rough from the cold, and his eyes, though tired, still carried a glimmer of grace. There was something about him that didn't quite fit the image of a man who'd lost everything. The way he sat up straight, the way he said, "Please," and "Thank you," the way he wiped his mouth after every bite, it was almost dignified. Later, when Tanya returned with the coffee pot, she asked gently, "So, Mr. Henry, how long you been in town?" He smiled faintly. "Oh, long enough to see how folks treat strangers." She poured his cup full, smiling back. "Well, not all folks are the same." "No," he agreed, looking up at her with misty eyes. "You're not like the rest. You've got light in you, child. Don't ever let this world take that away." Something about his words hit her deep. She laughed softly, brushing it off. "I'm just doing my job, Mr. Henry." But he shook his head. "No, you're doing God's work. There's a difference." When she went back to the counter, her manager gave her a hard look. "Tanya, we can't just give out free meals. You start that, and everyone will expect the same." "I know," she said calmly. "But he's not everyone. He's hungry." The manager sighed, rubbing his temples. "You've got a big heart, girl, but this place runs on money, not miracles." "Then maybe it needs a little more of both," she said softly, walking away before he could respond. For the rest of the morning, Tanya kept checking on Mr. Henry. He ate slowly, savoring every bite, and when he was done, he folded his napkin neatly and left a single penny on the table, his way of saying thank you. As he stood to leave, he gave her a small nod, a kind of quiet respect that didn't need words. When the bell above the diner door jingled behind him, Tanya didn't know that she'd just changed her own destiny. That one plate of pancakes, that one act of kindness, would soon come back to her in ways she could never imagine. Because sometimes, the smallest good deed in a forgotten corner of the world can ripple further than anyone could dream, and Tanya Williams was about to find out just how powerful kindness could truly be.